episode, an exclusive episode of the Inside Factor. I'm joined here today by Mr. Niehaus. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. You should call me comrade, although I've been suspended temporarily by the ANC, I'm still a comrade.
Yeah, no, it's your second time to the show. Thank you for giving us this exclusive at very short notice.
Thank you very much for having me. It's obviously a very difficult time in the history of our country. I think a time of disgrace. You know, it is the first time since our democracy, 28 years later, that someone is now a political prisoner. And that someone is President Jacob Zuma, who has been given a sentence of 15 months for simply a procedural matter, not a trial. It is truly a disgrace. It is not what I would have expected from our democratic ANC government. And it is certainly not what I believe the majority of people in this country have been hoping for 28 years into our democracy.
Now, we've seen protests across the country. We saw in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, in Pinetown, in Johannesburg now, and in Jamestown now. Were you shocked with the reaction of people going to the streets protesting for the freedom of Jacob Zuma?
No, I'm not shocked by people coming forward to express their utter outrage. This is exactly what I've expected would happen. And it is also what the Nkandla Military Veterans Association has been warning about. Now, I must hasten to add, I have not warned that there will be instability and unrest because I want it. Nor did the Nkandla Military Veterans Association do so. We do not want it. It is not good for our country, and it is not good for our beloved liberation movement, the African National Congress. But unfortunately, there are hotheads who have not allowed themselves to carefully analyze the situation. And unfortunately, there are those who wanted to continue the persecution of President Jacob Zuma. Persecution that has been taking place over a period of 22 years. And I really want to emphasize this issue, that President Zuma has been placed in an impossible position because he has consistently been placed in this position of being targeted, and that the judicial system has been used to target.
Now, staying on former President Jacob Zuma, many comrades feel like former President Jacob Zuma is too fair. He loves the ANC so much, but his own comrades are the ones who are dealing with him today. I remember him singing outside court, saying that, I can't remember the correct words, but he's saying that are the same ones today who are perishing, if I could say so. Do you think that the former president loves the ANC so much that his own comrades today are now dealing with him and he does not want to come out and speak publicly about such things?
There are few people who love the African National Congress as much as President Zuma does. And I've spoken so many times about the ANC and about this terrible tragedy that is playing out and the way in which President Zuma has been targeted to him. And every time he's been saying the same thing. Please, do not attack the African National Congress. I love the ANC. It is not the ANC that is failing. It is not the grassroots members of the African National Congress who are really the ANC that is failing. The leadership are failing us. One of his last messages to me when I spoke to him was to say, it will come right. He said to me, and he looked at me, he said, the ANC is an amazing organization.
I know you shook your hand before you went in.
Oh yes, he did, but let me just finish that sentence. It's an amazing organization. It always, despite the most and greatest difficulties, self-corrects. And right, the evening when we were at Nkandla, that dreadful, fateful Wednesday evening, when President Zuma decided that he was going to hand himself over to the correctional services at Escort Correctional Facility, He was encouraging us. We were trying to encourage him. But he came up to me, and when he shook my hand, he said, "Be strong, my comrade." Him encouraging me while he is the person who's been persecuted and going into jail. That's how I know Nkandla. And it was an emotional evening. His family were there. President Zuma greeted them. There were tears in their eyes. But as he got into the car to drive off to that correctional facility, to jail, the family started singing, "Mshinwa, Mshinwa." The same spirit that President Zuma has, never to cower, never to give in, never to give up.
Now, before we get into that and the emotional perspective of that night, the day before that, you were in Nkandla. MKMVA members are there, the media is there, the whole world is watching. But you come out and you call for peace. Can you tell me what is the thinking behind that?
Well, the night before I went to Nkandla on that Friday, our national executive of Nkandla, which is where Military Veterans Association, had a national executive meeting. And we discussed the situation. We recalled that we took a decision in 2017 at our 5th national conference that we will protect and support President Zuma. I was given an instruction by the national executive of the African National Congress to go to Nkandla to address the media, but also to address the people there, especially our NKMVA comrades who've been deployed there over months. And they said to me, "You must bring the following message. We will protect and we will defend President Zuma. We love President Zuma. We are executing a resolution of our conference, but we will do so within the parameters of the law." And that is the message that I delivered. I delivered that message loud and clear at the press conference on that Friday, the 2nd of February. That press conference was an hour long. I got the impression that some of the media felt that the message was coming over too strong, too clear. And right at the end, one of the journalists started taking some action, misusing a little bit of rowdiness that there were amongst the crowd who gathered while we were doing the press conference. Nothing bad, nothing intimidatory, just a bit of engagement. He misused it to break up the press conference. I got the distinct impression that he was given an instruction on his headphone. Break it up. This is enough.
Can you mention that journalist?
Can I mention what?
That journalist?
No, I'm not going to mention his name. You can go and look at him. He's a journalist from ENCA. Not surprising. ENCA gets up to these kind of shenanigans all the time. But my point that I'm making to you is that I went to Nkandla with a very clear objective: to express our utter and fundamental disgust and opposition at the imprisonment of President Zuma, on the understanding that his constitutional rights have fundamentally been undermined, as I said at the beginning of this interview, that he was in fact being imprisoned as the first political prisoner in South Africa. But I also went there to call for peace, to call for stability, to call for people to stay within the confines of the law. Now that is, but the point I'm making to you is that was my instruction from NKMVA. I carried it out to the hilt, and subsequently I spoke to my comrades and they said, "Thank you, you've done exactly what we've asked you to do."
Now, how was the reaction from the members on the ground? Did they take it well? Because we saw on social media people saying, we'll take up arms for Ubaba, we're not going to allow him to hand himself over. Now, how was the reaction of people on the ground when you told the comrades, let's have peace?
Well, it's understandable that not necessarily that message fell on fertile ground, because people are angry. But I continued to repeat it. The next day, when we came back to Nkandla, we had a very bad experience. In fact, the Sunday, not the Saturday, the Sunday, when there were police that blocked our way from Ishawe to Nkandla. A very volatile situation. People were angry. There was a standoff. I could see that it could erupt into violence. I got out of my car. I went to engage with the officer in charge. He said to me he cannot handle the situation. He's calling the commanding officer from the local police station. He came. That commanding officer said a very interesting thing to me. He said, I'm not the troublemaker, because I said, officer, you are making trouble here. He said, no, I'm not the troublemaker, the minister is. I do not want you to be blocked here, but we've got instructions. So I spoke to him, I engaged with him. I then went to the crowd, who were very angry, volatile. There's a video about it. I had to call several times during the time that I was addressing the people who got out of their cars. They were blocked. Please remain calm. We're trying to find a solution. And thank God, my discussion with that officer convinced him to let us through. As I finished what I was saying there, he came up to me and said, Mr. Niehaus, you can go, and the convoy can get through. Now, I think that was a constructive contribution that I made that morning. Now, what surprised me is this week, on Wednesday, actually just before I left to go back to Nkandla, I then get a call from the African National Congress that the National Executive Committee of the ANC at their special meeting the Monday before had taken the decision to immediately, temporarily suspend me. And I was told by the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Comrade Jessie Duarte, that she is sending a driver to urgently deliver that letter of suspension to me. So I received it just before I left. I sat down and I looked at this letter, and he said, I made incendiary remarks. I was putting the African National Congress into disrepute. That my behavior at Nkandla was fostering unrest and violence. What nonsense.
Now, can I ask, were you given the 48 hours?
No, I wasn't given the 48 hours to lodge an appeal. I was told that my suspension is with immediate effect because apparently they believed that I would continue to conduct myself in this unbecoming manner, as they described it. Now, one thing they were right about. I was not going to behave unbecomingly, but I was most certainly going to continue to express my opposition to President Zuma's arrest and to the whole process of persecution that he's been subjected to. But what I want to emphasize is, how does the African National Congress, when I made this contribution to call on people to remain calm, when there were no other leaders visibly there were one or two who came to see President Zuma. The one person who was visibly there on the Sunday was Comrade Tony Nkandla, and I think it should be appreciated as a senior member of the National Executive and National Working Committee of the ANC that he was there, and of course Comrade Ace Makashule, our Secretary General. But from the rest of the leadership, there was no one. I took leadership. I made sure that those comrades would be disciplined. I pleaded with my fellow comrades in Nkandla Military Veterans Association, who were very angry, were prepared to act in a way that would have and could potentially have led to unrest and violence. I pleaded with them, let's remain calm, let's remain disciplined, but at the same time, let's remain principled. The night when President Zuma decided to go to the escort prison, before I went into the Nkandla residence, I first met with the comrades and I addressed them. And I asked them to be disciplined. I said to them, if you want to protect President Zuma, do it in a non-violent, peaceful way. You can form what is called a human shield. And let me emphasize this. I'm surprised that there are members of the African National Congress who doesn't know the history of peaceful resistance and non-violence. Human shield was first used as a concept for peaceful resistance by Mahatma Gandhi. He was the first one that referred to human shield. Subsequently, it was used by Martin Luther King Jr. in all the civil disobedience campaigns in the United States, especially in the South. But the ANC, and unfortunately through its Deputy Secretary General, comes to a press conference and says, when we heard that the word human shield was used, we immediately started thinking of terrorism. How is that terrorism? Why do we always want to interpret things in the most negative way, when there's a positive approach to try and channel fundamental and reasonable unhappiness in a proper manner? So this is what I try to do. Now, unfortunately, for all my efforts, for having traveled twice to Nkandla, twice in different times, having been there from the period of the 2nd to the 4th, having worked day and night to maintain peace and make sure that we handle things in a dignified way, I get this letter.
Now, I just want to ask you now, you get suspended now. Ismail Shule gets suspended now. Do you think that all those who have basically come out in support of former President Jacob Zuma are not going to be dealt with by the current leadership?
Well, we're beginning to think that that may very well be the case. And you see, that feeds into the narrative that there's a vindictive approach to certain people within the African National Congress, while others are being left off the hook. And that the judiciary and the whole legal enforcement system, also the National Prosecuting Authority, gets used for factional and party political reasons. Why can you concentrate on President Zuma? You actually manipulate and manage a process with regards to the armed trial over more than 22 years. You decide when he had to be charged in the early days of that process, in engagements between Leonard McCarthy and some other people in the political field. Leonard McCarthy was then senior in the National Prosecuting Authority, talking to Bulelani Ngcuka, who was the head of the NPA. When can we charge President Zuma? When can we make sure that the biggest damage will be done to his political career? Saki Makhuzoma, a close friend to Bulelani Ngcuka, a senior businessman, a man who was very close to President Thabo Mbeki, making calls saying it's time for you to finish off the Zulu boy and peasant. Go and listen to those recordings. That is the genesis, the history, the beginning of this process that President Zuma has been subjected to. Now look what is being done to Comrade Ismail Shule as the Secretary General. Instead of implementing the full stepping aside resolution, as that resolution had become popularly known, which are 10 points, various categories. Those who have serious allegations against them. Those who are found guilty by some of the other legal institutions within the Constitution, such as the Public Protector. All of those. You go and rewrite, you go and reformulate that resolution so that it only becomes those who have been charged in the court of law. You disregard the fact that even a charge in the court of law is still only an allegation. No one has been found guilty. It's an allegation. You narrow it down to that in order to target certain people. You target Comrade Ismail Shule, you target Comrade Bongani Bongo, and a few others. All of them with a particular political persuasion within the African National Congress. People who are known to have put themselves out and to have worked for radical economic transformation. But other people in the African National Congress, like Zizi Kotwa, like Thabang Makwetla, people with serious allegations against them. Thabang Makwetla having been found guilty by the Ethics Committee of Parliament. The very serious allegations against the Deputy Minister of Intelligence, Zizi Kotwa.
He says he bought a jeep with the money.
I beg your pardon?
He says he bought a jeep with the money he got.
Well, I don't know what he bought, but he got a lot of money apparently from the Zondo Commission. And he is in debt with that money, while he is the person with his fingertips in charge of our intelligence. Not only does it compromise our intelligence services, but it's a serious allegation and a serious threat to all of us and to himself. But yet, he's not being asked to step aside. I can go on and on. So some people are being forced to step aside. They have been targeted. Resolutions of the ANC get rewritten in order to target them, while others are left off the hook. So you've got this funny factional political monopoly game. Some go straight to jail, others are being given a go-free card.
Now, speaking of Jeff, before I touch on you being arrested live on TV during an interview with SABC, I just want to touch on the day before, while during the house when you were in Nkandla with the former president. I just want to find out the thinking behind the former president to hand himself over. What took that decision?
You know, President Zuma, as we said at the beginning of this interview, loves the AIDS, and he loves this country. The reasons why he has been insisting that he was not going to go to the Zondo Commission while there's this very biased judge arraigned against him, and why he was not going to the 2 constitutional court hearings that led to his imprisonment now. The reasons for that was that he felt that fundamental human rights are being undermined, rights that he fought for. And he said to me, if I allow those rights for me to be undermined, they will be undermined eventually for the whole population. I fought for the liberation of this country. I was part of the Constitutional Assembly that wrote this Constitution. I've got a fundamental and principled duty to resist and not to allow this to happen. Now, why do I give you this introduction? I give you this introduction because that explains also why President Zuma decided to hand himself over to the prison authorities at Escort. He did not want to see violence. He did not want to see people putting their lives at risk. He understood the reasons for it very well. He understood people's anger, but he didn't want that to happen right there at his doorstep in his name. So he made a careful, balanced decision. Let me hand myself over in order to avoid this. So the decision of President Zuma to hand himself over was the decision of a South African patriot, someone who loves his country, someone who's prepared to sacrifice himself. But no one must try to interpret President Zuma's decision to hand himself over as acceptance of that sentence. He remains utterly and fundamentally opposed to that sentence that is being imposed on him.
Now, a few hours just after he gets arrested, on social media we see leaked pictures of the former president circulating on social media. Some making accusations that those come from the minister himself of justice. What do you think happened with that?
It's utterly disgusting. It's anyhow illegal. You're not allowed to take pictures that are being used to process a person that goes into a correctional facility and release it to the public. You see what happened? With that dignified manner in which President Zuma handed himself over, we went there, he handed himself over as a statesman. They were disappointed. They wanted a scene at Nkandla. They wanted to humiliate him. So when they couldn't do that, now they came forward and leaked these pictures in order to try and humiliate him. Those who've done so ought to be arraigned. They ought to be charged because they acted illegally. And all of us must express our utter disgust that they decided to do so. But I do not believe in coincidences. This was not some little mistake. This was not some little warder who decided to sneak the pictures out. This was an official decision in order to embarrass and humiliate President Zuma. As they say in the movies, we see. We see them very clearly. And it brings me back to the point of the outrage that you are seeing growing throughout our country. And please understand me. I'm not calling for violence. I do not want to see instability. I do not want to see the economy of South Africa destroyed. But what is happening today and the last number of days is what I would call a spontaneous outpouring of anger by people who cannot believe that a liberation movement government, the African National Congress government, can allow a thing like this to happen. People are angry. And I have warned, and Nkandla is where Military Veterans Association have warned, if this happens, if President Zuma is to be arrested, there will be instability. There will be an outpouring of anger. It will lead to a situation that will be most damaging to our country and to the African National Congress. Now, I don't like to go around telling people I told you so. And I did tweet it this afternoon on a tweet, and one very senior member of the African National Congress immediately responded back to me and said, this is cheap. No, it's not cheap. It's the truth. We told them so. What we have today is that this national executive of the African National Congress have failed us as a people of South Africa. And this liberation movement, with its illustrious history, with people like Comrade Oliver Tambo, with people like Chief Albert Lutuli, great leaders, Comrade Chris Hani, they failed that history. They failed that legacy. They failed to give leadership. Why must I, which is a junior person, compared to many of the people in the national executive of the ANC, rush to Nkandla to try and contain things, to give leadership? Where were they? Why did they not bring leadership? Why did they not prevent President Zuma from being arrested? And nope, and I'm sorry, please forgive me for getting angry.
It's okay.
I'm getting angry. Where were they when those problems arose? Where are they now when all of this outpouring of anger is happening? And no one must tell me that, yes, there's this separate judiciary which is almost hermeneutically sealed from the political side. Oh, come on. It's God's wallop. The interaction between politics and judiciary is always there. And in this country, with the manner in which our courts have been used, abused, our judiciary having been used for factional political purposes, the kind of judgments that we've seen, even on Friday, just 2 days ago, the judgment with regards to Comrade Ace Magashula, the judgment with regards to the application for President Zuma's arrest warrant to be set aside. Good grief. What kind of judgments are these? What has happened to our judiciary that they can be used in this way as a factional tool? What we see here is the weaponization of the judiciary for political factional purposes, and it leads to a situation which undermines our constitutional democracy and instead now creates for us a situation of a dictatorship of the judiciary.
Now you keep on hinting that you keep on getting lovely messages, lovely love letters from senior members of the ANC. What kind of messages are those, Carl?
Some of them are quite disturbing because they are attacks on me and other comrades, saying that we are apparently somehow responsible for this violence. And let me state categorically, I have not planned any violence. I will never do so. I have not been involved in organizing anything with regards to people getting angry. The anger is spontaneous. The outpouring of anger that you see in the streets of Durban, that you saw today in Johannesburg, in Jeppe, and in Alexandra, and what is also happening in Cape Town, is a people's uprising out of anger because they're so deeply disappointed with this lack of leadership from the African National Congress's NEC. because they feel betrayed by a movement that allows one of the greatest and most illustrious liberation fighters in this country to go to prison on a technicality, while at the same time they allow F.W. de Klerk to walk the streets of South Africa free. You know, it is such an aberration. P.W. Botha refused to go to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He was treated with kid gloves. He was given a little slap on the wrist. He was given a piffy little fine and allowed to go back to his retirement house in the Anker in the Eastern Cape and live there and dies peacefully. But President Zuma, who's a liberation fighter, has to be humiliated, has to be imprisoned. And let me pause there. We had some very sad news today. President Zuma's younger brother, Mike, passed away. This is an indication of the kind of hurt and pain that has been inflicted on that family. The death of Mike is not something which can be isolated from what has been done to the Zuma family and to President Zuma in person. From my side and from the side of Nkandla Military Veterans Association, we want to extend our heartfelt condolences to President Zuma and to the whole Zuma family. And we can only say to them, we in our hearts and in our spirit with you, we embrace you. We wish tonight we could go to Baba and embrace him. But the hard and high walls of Escort prison, where he's been put by his own comrades, is separating us and preventing us from giving him the love and the comradeship that he deserves.
No, I think condolences to the Zuma family and to you as ANC comrades. Now, I want to be a bit tough on you now, Carl. You mentioned F.W. de Klerk. Now, as young people, we feel like it is you guys as senior comrades who left F.W. de Klerk alone. It is you guys who negotiated in Kodesa. It is you guys who led this government for 27 years. Why are you guys complaining about F.W. de Klerk now while you guys had the opportunity to arrest him?
Well, I think it is a situation where we allowed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to become a farce. I must admit that personally I've objected to the TRC right from it. And I'm on record. No one can say I've just fought this up now and I'm trying to justify myself. Archbishop Desmond Tutu called me and asked me to come to the TRC when one of the people who tortured me terribly, a warrant officer, Niehaus, was applying for amnesty. I'm wearing hearing aids today because of that man. Because of the manner in which he tortured me, damaged my ears, and took away from me 60% of my hearing. I told Archbishop Desmond Tutu, over my dead body, will I go to that commission. He said to me, well, that's an unchristian act. I said, Bishop, as far as I know, justice is always going hand in hand with restitution and true contrition, none of which these apartheid agents have shown. Why do we have to give them amnesty? Why did we have to humiliate Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela? Bring her there, and Bishop Tutu crying with tears in his eyes, please apologize. Apologize? For lies? Lies about Stompie Sipay? Everything that later came out, that there were directives, Stratcom directives and manipulation of the media and propaganda to besmirch Mama Winnie's name. But she had to apologize, as if her acts and what she did for our liberation was on an equal footing with people like Wouter Basson and the Vlakplaas crowd who killed people and chopped them up and burned them It's a disgrace, man. And I repeat what I've said many times in the last number of months. F.W. de Klerk ought to be in prison. And I repeat what I said to you just now. It's an utter disgrace that an ANC government can put a commander of Nkandla, one of the greatest liberation leaders, one of the last in a generation of people who sacrificed their whole lives for our liberation, in jail. And F.W. de Klerk is walking the streets of South Africa, whistling away as if nothing is wrong. That man committed crimes against humanity. 2 years ago, he had the temerity to go on national television and deny that apartheid is a crime against humanity. Then he was received in our National Assembly. He walked the red carpet. The Speaker, Thandi Modise, gave him a smooch. They all welcomed him. Zizi Kotwa ran out when people were protesting outside the de Klerk is there, ran out and shouted there to the media. De Klerk is going nowhere. He's here. We're protecting him. Welcome, Mr. de Klerk. Wow. That's not the behavior of people who are liberation fighters. Why must we embrace this man and do what we do to President Zuma?
Now, as we go to the end of the show now, you go to escort, you're speaking to an SABC journalist, you get arrested live on TV. What was going through your mind?
Well, let me first explain why I went to escort. The night when we greeted President Zuma at Nkandla, we said, we'll come tomorrow to visit you. Because we are concerned comrades. We want to go there and see that Baba is okay. We're worried. There may be forces that may want to kill him. How do we know if there's not forces who may want to poison him? How do we know? So we traveled there. We wanted to get in, we were refused. And then I saw a number of people, not many, about 20, I think, perhaps even less, of comrades, dedicated comrades who were there, standing quietly, very disciplined, just showing their respect to Baba. And they called me and greeted me, and I thought, look, it would be improper of me not just to walk over there, say a few words to them, which I did. I addressed them for a short while. They were keeping distance. We were not in any way provocative. And one of the journalists from the SABC at the end of that little interaction came to me and wanted to do an interview. So I agreed. So while I'm doing the interview, where, by the way, I once again called for peace, I once again called for people to behave in a disciplined way and to act within the confines of the law. Here comes a number of police officers and grab live on national television, pull me away, put me in a vehicle. The officer who was in charge of that group in the car starts swearing at me. And I get driven off to the police station in escort. Now I'm apparently charged for having addressed, and I put it in quotation marks, addressed a political gathering. And I understood that there was some political, what would I call it, pressure on the officers there to keep me in that prison overnight. And there was some political pressure to say, take him straight from the prison to a special COVID-19 court and give him a 6-month sentence without the option of a fine. Now, thank God, there are still decent people amongst our police force. And I want to emphasize, I do not have a fight with our police force. When they are given instructions, I understand. They have to do their job, they have to carry out orders. But there were some decent people there who said, no, this is an aberration of justice. We cannot do this. Who elevated that to the provincial commissioner and beyond. And eventually the decision was that I would be given the option of paying a fine, admission of guilt, which I immediately said, no ways. I've done nothing wrong, so why should I admit guilt? And therefore I was now given the charge, and I have to appear. I think it's 10th of August, if I remember correctly. I'll have to look at the document that they gave. but I have to appear in the Escort Magistrates Court, which I will go and do, and I'll state my case. Because anyhow, these people behaved as they did on record, on national television. But you see, the interesting thing is, there's a number of people there. None of the other people get arrested. No one is being arraigned and grabbed. There was a clear order, go for Carl Niehaus, arrest him. And you know why? Because it is intentional to try and intimidate people and put the fear of God into people, not to express their opposition to President Zuma's imprisonment, and not to express their outrage at the failure of our national executive and our ANC-led government to handle this situation differently and prevent this tragedy and crisis that has now erupted. That is what they have failed. People are angry. So now they want to intimidate people not to express their anger. That is exactly how the apartheid regime used to behave. Intimidate. Try and make one or two people an example to make other people fearful. I'm very grateful and I'm very happy that our people are not allowing themselves to be intimidated, that they are continuing to express their outrage, that they're continuing to register their insistence that President Zuma must be released, that they have now a hashtag which is trending all over the country, one of the ones that is trending at the highest point, Free Jacob Zuma. I'm very happy that people have not allowed themselves to be intimidated, because I would hate to see a situation where we return to the old apartheid regime.
Now, Mr. Niehaus, as we come to the end of this exclusive interview, what is your message to the ANC, and especially the branch members at the bottom?
At the moment, in terms of my letter, I can't speak as a member of the ANC. And I'm going to be disciplined not to do it for now, because that suspension is a temporary suspension. And let me emphasize, I am appealing that suspension because that suspension is fundamentally unfair. But no one can stop the ordinary rank and file members of the African National Congress from expressing their views. The ANC is a fundamentally democratic organization. If the ANC is not democratic, if the ANC doesn't recognize the power of the branches and the members in the branches and the structures of the ANC from branch to regional to provincial to national, the ANC will collapse. Our members must continue to speak their minds. Our people in South Africa must continue to speak their minds. Many of my fellow comrades died for the right to freedom of speech. It's one of the fundamental rights that we fought for. I fought for it. I went to prison. I'm grateful that I survived and I can continue the struggle. And when I express myself now, and I'm not prepared to be intimidated, I'm not prepared to be scared, I'm not prepared to cower, I do that because I remember the blood that my fellow comrades have shed. And I say to myself, there's no ways that I will allow their blood to have been shed in vain. We have to continue the struggle until we have full liberation. That full liberation cannot be returning to apartheid, of course not. Cannot be a repression of the right to freedom of expression of your views, of your opinions, or the right to express your opinion with regards to the injustices of a legal system that is being abused. But similarly, that full freedom has to be accompanied by full economic liberation. And I repeat this a million times and I will never stop saying it. Oliver Tambo, our longest serving president of the African National Congress, said, oppression in South Africa is not just the oppression of race. It's also the oppression of economic exploitation. and race and economic exploitation go hand in hand. White monopoly capitalism is in control of this country. White monopoly capitalism is at this stage robbing our people from their livelihood. It's even worse now under the COVID-19 pandemic. Poverty has gone sky high. Unemployment is rife. Our people are literally going hungry. If we today, under these circumstances, can't see that we need full economic liberation, we will never see it. And those comrades who have filled their pockets, who have made common cause with white monopoly capitalism, who are no longer interested in the liberation of our people in the full, which must include economic liberation, they are selling us out. They are betraying us. We have to say it. We can't beat around the bush. And we have to challenge them. Because ultimately, it is on our shoulders, those of us who are not selling out, those of us who are not selling our hearts for a pot of lentil soup from the tables of white monopoly capitalism, to save the ends. The African National Congress can be saved. And why do I say that? And this is my last words. Because it's not the ANC that has failed. Because the ANC is the people. It's our leaders who failed. And those leaders who failed, who allowed this aberration of President Zuma's arrest, those leaders who allowed this continuation of exploitation of our people and the white monopoly capitalism, those leaders who have allowed the super exploitation of our people under COVID-19 and the whole-scale looting that took place under COVID-19, they are the ones that have to be brought to book. They have to face the music. They have to stop trying to tell us that they're still liberation fighters when they've actually just become the agents, the comprador capitalist agents of white monopoly capitalism.
Mr. Khan, thank you very much for giving us this interview short notice.
Thank you. And can I say one last word? And now I'm going to look straight into the camera. I call on every South African, whether you're a member of the ANC, member of any other political party, to continue to express your unbridled outrage at this injustice that has been committed against President Jacob Zuma, and to continue to fight for your full liberation until the day that our people, black in general, African in particular, will be in control of the commanding heights of our economy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was another exclusive interview on The Inside Factor, where we bring you uncensored and unfiltered news. Until next time, good night.